You're putting social transition on the same bar of like, should be considered a last resort. Like, can we just acknowledge once again that that is explicitly genocidal? If you're like, we need to do everything we can to make sure that there are as few trans people, like if like letting someone be trans and be happy is the last resort in severe cases, then you explicitly are you are applying genocidal pressures to trans people. Like, I don't know what else to say. I don't know how you can explain it in any other manner. If you're ready to talk about the NHS and their murderous anti-trans policies and guidelines, hit like on the video. So the NHS has been really restricting access to trans healthcare for a while. Like, if you haven't already, I really highly recommend watching Abigail's new video over on Philosophy Tube about the NHS and the systemic failures of bureaucracy that lead to extremely long wait lists and stuff. Yeah, NHS for no healthcare service, true. Like, for example, like the main problem with the NHS and the way that they handle transgender healthcare is that they have the right to receive care within 18 weeks of receiving a referral. So if you go to the doctor and you need specialist care, like you need to go to a dermatologist or something because you have cystic acne or whatever, you go to your general practitioner and then they refer you to dermatology, and you have the legal right to be seen at the dermatologist office within 18 weeks. You're also supposed to have the right to receive an appointment at a gender clinic within that 18 weeks. Like, from the time that you go to your GP and they refer you, you're supposed to be seen within 18 weeks at the gender clinic. But the wait lists for a first appointment, a very, very first appointment, is incredibly long. Years and years, like years, literally. People wait just to get seen for a first appointment. So if you want to see more in depth about that, I highly recommend checking out that video again. But we're going to be looking at some very specific new potential changes to the way the NHS addresses trans healthcare for young people. Because currently the situation, frankly, in the UK is, for young people, pretty much like an unending nightmare. Because if you like realize you're trans at age 15, let's say, like some people, then you might get referred to the gender clinic from your GP. And let's just assume that they sent the letter for referring you on the first try, like they're legally supposed to, instead of making you wait arbitrarily. You will then be put on a wait list for the children. Now, let's just be realistic. Like, the wait lists at the Tavistock were like 3 years, I believe was what I've most recently read. And consequently, you age off of the wait list. Like, you as a 15-year-old were hoping, oh, maybe I can get puberty blockers to prevent my body from changing even more than it already has. Like, maybe you're like developing breasts and you realize like, oh, my breasts currently are still small enough to get like the type of surgery that has really minimal scarring. And if they continue to grow, then I won't have that opportunity anymore. And it'll be even more expensive sometimes. Like, you know, you'd like to be able to put a pause on those things, right? But then you age off of the children's list because you turned 18. And then you have to get on the adult waiting list, which is like they will just straight up say it's like 5 years long, essentially. There's like 5,000 people on the wait list right now, and they're only seeing like 50 people in a given month. Like, there are thousands of people waiting, and they're only seeing 50 individuals, only 50 first-time patient visits in 1 month. That's the most recent information as of 2022. So that's the current situation for trans youth. Realistically, they've just bureaucratically ground things to a halt in such a way that it's simply inaccessible to trans youth through the NHS, the public health system, which is the tax-funded system that's free to access. Instead, what people have to do and what young people have to do is they either go private, which means that like they do have private healthcare similar to how we do in the US over there, where it's like there is no government controlling the system. It's just like some person set up a hospital or whatever. So there are private clinics to provide this kind of care. and they have hundreds of patients there. It's just more, it's like expensive. In the UK, you don't really spend money on healthcare. It's not something you budget for. So if you're already, very slim paycheck to paycheck kind of monetary situation, you are not going to have the opportunity to go private. There's also the option of doing DIY, like the gray market, or I guess in some cases the black market for hormones. Estrogen, as I understand it, is legal to acquire just on the internet and bring into the UK, as far as I understand. Puberty blockers, I'm not sure about the legality of that. So all of this to say that there has been recent guidance, which is going to change the way that it's already being done. Like the way that it's currently being done is they've just bureaucratically slowed things down to where it's basically impossible for young people to access puberty blockers or hormones. They're now implementing changes. So what are those changes? Well, it's kind of hard to say right this second, because back in October, they posted the guidelines. They had drafted new guidelines for treating transgender youth, and then they were going to have a period of open public commentary, and they took it down. Let's see. The service has said previously that it would soon share its preliminary guidelines with the public to allow for feedback and revision. It says the changes are necessary to provide timely care for young people who seek medical help, while ensuring that the system is robust and the treatments are safe. So it's actually kind of weird. The draft prepared by NHS England, seen by Reuters, stressed that there is now an urgent need to finalize the guidelines and help set up new services for trans youth, quote, as quickly as possible. It was briefly uploaded to the NHS England website at the end of September with plans for a 45-day public comment period, but it was later removed. An NHS spokesperson declined to say why or when a finalized and fuller version will be made public. But it was available briefly, and we may be able to basically, just based on comments that other people have made about it, we might be able to kind of determine what some of those initial recommendations or guidelines may be. And Reuters, I believe, did see this document. So I believe this is supposed to be like the most accurate that we can get about what is in it. In England, a years-long wait for gender care has led some young people to seek medications through unregulated online pharmacies or privately. Privately is regulated, like unregulated online pharmacies. It's not illegal to buy estrogen that way. I'm not sure about puberty blockers, but privately is considered regulated in this country. These include therapies that block the onset of puberty or hormone treatments for older people, which are used to help transgender adolescents develop secondary sex characteristics aligned with their gender identity. Gender GP, for example, a private provider of treatments for trans patients, told Reuters that it has prescribed medications such as those to hundreds of youth. The draft guideline says that if NHS professionals decide a patient should not be taking puberty blockers or hormone treatments obtained privately, they can advise the patient's primary care doctor to initiate, quote, safeguarding protocols. This is the tricky thing. So like if a NHS professional decides that something that you obtained privately through the regulated private medical care system, they can advise the patient's primary care doctor to initiate, quote, safeguarding protocols. The draft does not spell out why safeguarding measures would be taken or what that would entail per se, but under NHS protocols, safeguarding teams are made up of representatives of the police, medical, and social services professionals who are responsible for ensuring a child's safety and well-being. So this is like to be completely clear, I want to be fully and completely clear. That is the government is going to take your children away from you situation. Like if the NHS official position is that you shouldn't be taking puberty blockers, which are just to buy you time. That's all puberty blockers do. Again, puberty blockers are the compromise position. That's the compromise position, and they're rejecting it. They're spitting in our face, as usual. If the government, NHS, decides that you shouldn't be on hormone blockers, then they're going to initiate a process that includes representatives from police and medical and social services professionals, like safeguarding teams, ensuring a child's safety and well-being, which means that you are going to basically initiate an investigation, like basically a criminal investigation. If this is, it's the same kind of bullshit that we're seeing in Florida and in Texas here in America, where they're just pretending as though the legislative process doesn't exist. Like they're just finding ways to circumnavigate the people's vote or the representatives doing their jobs in representing their constituents as they can. Like if their constituents are saying, hey, these are our children and they deserve medical care, and you're using some like board of medicine, this doesn't count as medical care, fucking loophole bullshit. Like you're just spitting right in the face of democracy. It's pretty straightforward in my opinion. Yeah, trans people functionally don't have NHS healthcare as adults now for new patients either. Yeah. I mean, it's a bureaucratic like grinding of the gears to a halt for sure. Let's move back to this. So, yeah, and of course the NHS has previously said that it strongly discouraged people from sourcing gender-affirming medications online from providers that are not regulated within the UK. Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, yeah, how about you fucking fix your system? Of course people shouldn't take unregulated medication, but what else are they going to do? I mean, I just don't know what else you expect. Any new guy, a spokesperson from Gendered Intelligence, a trans-led charity, says that any new guidelines must avoid a rehash of the current system, which has, quote, so many administrative barriers and capacity issues that it has become unsustainable. It's crucial that the new services focus on facilitating access to treatment and support rather than leaving young people and their families in limbo. Yeah, but that's not what they're going to do. Other changes in the draft guidelines include allowing only NHS professionals to refer youth for gender care. I thought that was already the case. I thought that you already had to go to your local NHS. Oh no. So this is saying that private healthcare can't be provided for trans care. Only NHS professionals can refer youth for gender care. That means that private providers would be made illegal, basically. At least like Gender GP, for example, one that was named earlier, is one that is specifically, as far as I can tell, it's called Gender GP. I imagine the clinic exists for the purpose of providing this care. That clinic would be effectively shut down by these guidelines. I didn't make that connection before now. It would propose teams with wider professional expertise within the clinics. Who else do you think you need to... This makes me think that they're going to bring in psychotherapists and conversion therapy bullshit with wider professional expertise. Like, what do you mean? You should just have endocrinologists. Like, that's... I mean, what else do you need? Requiring meetings between referring staff and a clinic to establish if gender clinics are the best route for treatment. I mean, that would be great, I guess, if it weren't for the fact that the communications between the referring staff and the clinic were already not, like, really slow and kind of horked out. Yeah, it's brilliant. Privatizing the NHS, but specifically keeping it around and then forcing trans people to use the underfunded system, for sure. This says that the current wait time to see gender care professionals is now about 3 years, with like 5,000 patients in the most recent financial year. Gender-affirming care can include social transitioning, which recognizes a child's preferred name, pronouns, and mode of dress. Okay, so this is the Reuters article. Again, as far as I know, this is from October 14th. They actually may have seen the document. So I'm going to move to the Daily Mail now. I realize the Daily Mail is, I mean, it's broadly understood to be like transphobic, right? I mean, I'm not making that up there. So I'm okay with looking at this biased source and like acknowledging that it's biased here. Gender GP does adults as well as kids. They are an online service covering several countries. Okay, I see, Numpty. Thank you. So Gender GP could be providing this care to adults and continue to stay in business. That makes sense. So let's look at this. From the Daily Mail, doctors will no longer encourage gender-curious children to use preferred pronouns or dress as opposite sex under NHS guidelines. This came out 21st of October. The other one came out 14th of October. NHS considers risks of social transition in youth questioning their gender identity. Social transition including the name, pronouns, and cross-dressing. New guidelines say it can have significant effects on a child's study. They also say most children will not commit to gender changes in their teens. So here we go. Doctors are no longer supposed to encourage gender-curious children to use the pronouns of their preferred identity. NHS draft guidelines will also discourage the act of children dressing in clothes of the opposite sex. Health chiefs say social transitioning should no longer be viewed as a, quote, neutral act due to the significant effects it may have on a child's psychology. Ooh, scary. Social transitioning referring to being treated as the gender of your identity, whatever, but without the medical interventions like puberty blockers or hormones. So people changing their name, their pronouns, and the way they dress. Family, friends, and school are generally encouraged to be supportive of this process. This says at the extreme end of the scale, social transitioning can see people controversially using the bathrooms or changing facilities of their believed gender identity. Again, I'm just recognizing this very biased source. So, this is a transphobic source, so I'm saying it's not as though pro-trans activists are being making up bullshit to make you look bad. You know, this is your own transphobic editorial thing saying this is what the NHS has decided to try to do. The NHS England's draft approach calls on clinicians to recognize most cases of, quote, gender incongruence in children are just a phase. Wow. I wonder if it literally says just a phase in the documentation. I hope so. That would be really funny. The clinical approach with regard to prepubertal children will reflect evidence that in most cases, gender incongruence does not persist into adolescence, it reads. Why would it be bad to let it be a phase? Why would you discourage children from dressing how they want if you think it's a phase? What do you think is going to help? How is that going to help? Therefore, it says encouraging social transition for prepubescent children should be carefully considered due to the mental health risks posed to the child when they reach their teenage years. Just kind of broadly evoking mental health risks without specifying, the mental health risk of continuing to be trans, because they consider that a mental illness. Is that basically, yeah, it's just a phase. Show me a permanent state of being. There is no such thing. The clinical approach has to be mindful of the risks of an inappropriate gender transition and the difficulties that the child may experience in returning to the original gender role upon entering puberty if the gender incongruence does not persist into adolescence. I mean, again, just worrying more about the potential detrans people, the pretend detrans people who don't actually detrans. They really just go back to growing out their beards and calling themselves Kieran Bell. This says even for older children, those already in their adolescence, social transitioning should only be considered a last resort in severe cases. That's a last resort in severe cases is how we treat surgery. Surgery should be a last resort in extreme cases for children. Ideally, you don't want that to happen until they're 18, I guess, in an ideal world. It's in extreme mental health cases that it gets done below the age of 18. But you're putting social transition on the same bar of should be considered a last resort. Can we just acknowledge once again that that is explicitly genocidal? If you're we need to do everything we can to make sure that there are as few trans people, if letting someone be trans and be happy is the last resort in severe cases, then you explicitly are you are applying genocidal pressures to trans people. I don't know what else to say. I don't know how you can explain it in any other manner. What else would you call that? This is why the fucking trans genocide debate is so irritating. Is how could you, in what other context would trying to force people just to not be? I don't know, man. It's so fucking irritating. Yeah, social transition should only be considered where the approach is necessary for the alleviation of or prevention of clinically significant distress or can you fucking stop? Or significant impairment in social functioning, and the young person is able to fully comprehend the implications of affirming a social transition. What implications? This is why they had to withdraw it, because it probably did not pass peer review for 10 seconds. Yeah, transition does not need to be a last resort. I don't understand why. These guidelines have no effect in Scotland. Thank fucking Christ. At GenSpect, we believe that children should be free to wear whatever clothes they want, boys should be free to run around waving fairy wands and in princess dresses, and girls should be free to act however they wish. Yet we don't think changing pronouns helps anyone. It creates more problems than it resolves. That's so untrue, even. This person is, I guess, speaking partially in support of and partially in opposition to this guideline, because the guideline is against boys running around in princess dresses. Like, very explicitly, it is against that. The NHS England draft guidelines are part of the Health Services plan to close the highly controversial gender identity development service at the Tavistock Clinic, which is the country's only gender identity service for children. It's scheduled to shut its doors in the spring after a review ruled that the service was unsafe. It found that other mental health issues were, quote, overshadowed in favor of gender identity treatment, prompting accusations that staff rushed children onto powerful drugs. I thought they were going to be opening other clinics instead of Tavistock, but maybe I was wrong about that. GenSpect is an anti-trans lobby group that promotes conversion therapy. Yeah, I'm not terribly surprised to know that there is just a popular conversion therapy organization being quoted by the Daily Mail. Other sections of the draft, detailed that puberty blockers should only be provided via NHS research programs. Oh, so not even just only provided by the NHS. Like, not only make it so that private providers can't provide puberty blockers to teenagers, but that even if they get them through the NHS, it can only be through participation in a study. And medics should consider safeguarding processes if the children obtain such drugs online. Dr. Cass, this is the Cass report, has called for rapid research on the use of the drugs after she found, quote, insufficient evidence on their benefits. So I guess at least, if you're a teenager, you might be able to sign up for one of these studies and hope that you're not one of the placebo targets, I guess. Yes, that's the end of the article. So I haven't seen very many people talking about this, and it's likely because the guidelines were not public for very long. The guidelines were only available for a short time for the public to review, and then they were taken back down to be revised, I guess, which I guess reset that 45-day public comment period. I think that they would have been fairly lambasted if they had gone with this language as their official guidance. They're going to open local services. What that will look like depends on what happens with this current battle. Right, because there is a lawsuit happening, is there not? Where there are some trans people who are suing the government for the fact that it's delaying care so much. I was looking at this earlier today. NHS England waiting times for gender dysphoria patients are unlawful. So this might also be part of why the guidance was taken down, because there are current there are judicial processes in place, and they're being heard right now about the 18-week target we discussed early in the stream. Like, it is the right of an English citizen to receive healthcare within 18 weeks of a referral, and they are just far and away breaking that. It's a law. It's the right that they possess. It's not a guideline. It's not a suggestion. That's the law, and they're just not following it. So there's these lawsuits happening where trans claimants want the high court to point out that they're breaking the law and start, presumably fixing the problem. NHS England, which commissions the services for people with gender dysphoria, denies acting unlawfully. Yeah, of course. So this is ongoing, and I imagine that we will continue to see more developments. It may be a slow process. I don't know how courts work over there in the UK, but over here it's a very slow and difficult, annoying process, especially if you are suing the government and trying to get them to acknowledge they've done something wrong. But they have done in the past. Again, I really highly recommend that you go watch Philosophy Tube's most recent video as of this stream about the NHS and get into it, because Abigail points out that, the NHS has fucked up before, and it in a way that has resulted in similar death and families being hurt and stuff. Similar situation as what's happening now, when trans people who have been waiting for 3 years, for a first appointment, and can't afford medical care, can't afford it privately, end up killing themselves. So people have died by this negligent practice. They've done this before with a hospital policy that preferred natural births over cesareans. So a bunch of babies died from forced vaginal births, and a bunch of mothers died as well. And they ended up coming around and saying, yeah, we fucked up on that. And they're paying recompense and like paying the families like restitutions, right? So they're clearly able to reconcile with this. And we'd like to see them do that now. Like some public apologies and some changing policy. But it just seems like increasingly the transphobia is pervasive throughout the system, and a lot of bureaucratic mechanisms can gum up the system, and it really only takes like a handful of people just kind of refusing to do their jobs to increase the wait time that it requires for everybody to get their jobs done. But certainly there are issues with funding, and again, as Abigail points out, it's probably difficult to get people who are interested in asking the kinds of invasive questions that you must ask trans people in order to confirm their gender dysphoria diagnosis. It's a lot of very invasive questions about your sex life and your genitals and stuff. And I'm pretty sure that teenagers also have to be asked all those questions in order to receive their gender dysphoria diagnosis. So I could understand it being difficult to find people who want to do that. It seems pretty awkward as a job. So yeah, I haven't seen very many people talking about this, and I'm going to be interested to see if there's more developments, because I mean, I don't know what people are going to do if they make it to where even socially transitioning could prompt an investigation of potential wrongdoing, that medically your doctor is not allowed to recommend social transition because of the potential risks to mental health, which again, I think just means like they consider us as trans people to be like mentally ill and just incapable of being normal. So that's great. Yes, Katie Montgomery has been talking about it. The WPATH statement on those NHS draft guidelines. Yeah, let's check out the WPATH response. Just as a reminder, the WPATH is World Professional Association for Transgender Health. We've talked about them before on this channel, so I don't think we're going to read all... Wait, hold on. Is it just the top one? Yeah, it's just this top one. Okay, great. So the document fails to state that gender diversity is a normal and healthy aspect of human diversity, that many trans people experience gender incongruence from child or adolescence. Trans and gender diverse people have a human right to access the highest achievable standard of care, including gender-affirming care, according to the World Health Organization. We're concerned that rather than emphasizing the importance of equitable access to medically necessary support and treatment for children, adolescents, and young adults experiencing gender incongruence, the service specification appears designed to place unnecessary barriers in their way. Additionally, we state that when gender-affirming medical treatment is provided with a standardized multidisciplinary assessment and treatment process, thorough informed consent, and ongoing monitoring and psychosocial support, the rate of regret of gender-affirming medical treatment commenced in adolescence has been observed to be very low, and the benefits of treatment in adolescence are potentially greater than the benefits of gender-affirming treatment commenced in adulthood. Duh. Hence, the harms associated with obstructing or delaying access to wished-for and indicated treatment for the majority appear greater than the risks of regret for the few when trans and cis people are correctly regarded as equal. Like, that was a lot of big words, but TLDR, like, it is medically recommended by all reported sources at this time that, you know, starting care for trans kids when they are teens is more effective than starting transition as adults, and can lead to like better outcomes as far as their ability to maintain a job and maintain housing and shit like that. But of course, you don't want to make it easy. Anyway, the documentation makes assumptions about trans children and adolescents which are outdated and untrue, which then form the basis of harmful interventions. Amongst these is the supposition that gender incongruence is transient in prepubertal children. This document quotes selectively and ignores newer evidence about the persistence of gender incongruence in children. Many older studies regarding the stability of gender identity enlisted children who did not have gender incongruence or dysphoria, but rather had culturally nonconforming gender expression. So older studies about growing out of it, quote unquote, were not of children who had expressed gender dysphoria or incongruence, but simply had been dressing in a gender nonconforming manner. Like a tomboy phase, you could say. Findings of these older studies should only carefully be applied to children and young people who are presenting to gender identity clinics seeking gender-affirming treatment. It may be a different population. The document also makes unsupported statements about the influence of family, social, and mental health factors on the formation of gender identity. WPATH and all these organizations believe that children and young people can have agency and express their gender identity, and that the best course of action is to work collaboratively with the child or young person and family to support the trans or gender diverse person. That's pretty scathing. Oh, then they also responded to the New York Times article. Wow, we're not going to get into that right now because I should have looked at that already, I think. But yeah, I appreciate that kind of like summed up response. There was a larger response that we could have read way more information and gone really far into what the WPATH laid out. But broadly speaking, yeah, scathing. The NHS is terrible at providing care to trans kids. They really are trying to make it impossible to access basic medical care. And it remains to be seen whether they will succeed. Because it seems like their government, much like ours, is just going to continue sliding further and further and further and further and further and further and further into conservative hell. Thank you so much to my patrons for supporting all the work behind the scenes. I appreciate you so much, and I especially want to shout out Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvag, Jovian F. Gaudreau, Bean, M. Hatfield, Heather Clarkson, Amanda B., Sarah A., R. Halverson, Athiette, Michelle Winter, Wellington Marcus, Nova, Suzanne Maynard, Elizabeth Bartell, Sojo, and Mr. Atheist.